Dear colleagues, dear students, welcome to our seminar entitled Improving Teaching and Learning in Science and Engineering, a Research and Development Approach, which is organized by the Learning Development Network of the Cyprus University of Technology as part of the Distinguished Series program. We would like to thank our speaker, Roland Tormey, for being here and for giving his approach of the EPFL on teaching and learning. And our rector, Professor Panagiotis Zafiris, will address the welcome of the event.
We'll just talk from here actually, because I think we should not lose time. We're here to hear our speaker than me or anybody else. So thank you for coming, and this part of our attempt to develop our learning center and learn from experiences and approaches that others follow internationally and borrow and improve our practice. So I think all of us who are here and everybody else who is watching online would be very happy to hear your talk. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Roland, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the invitation, the very warm invitation, warm both physically. When I was packing my bag and it was 8 degrees in Lausanne, it was very hard to imagine what 31 degrees was going to feel like. But also a really warm reception and a really positive kind of conversation that we've already had today. So thank you for that. So what I'll do is basically talk to you about 3 things. First of all, I just want to tell you a little bit about my own teaching career, how I ended up where I am. The reason I do that is because, you know, it would be quite straightforward to give you lots of facts and figures, but facts and figures lack a sense of humanity. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a human story to go with the facts and figures, and hopefully that will make sense. I'll talk to you a little bit about teaching quality and, you know, some of the key issues that we have identified in terms of teaching quality, and talk to you a little bit about how we're trying to treat those in EPFL. And then I'll finish off with just some reflections, some ideas that I have no evidence for, but which I think makes sense to me about how to develop a culture of teaching improvement. So that's the key overview. And then, you know, what are the key messages that I really want to communicate in this? The first is about this idea of a research and development mindset for teaching. I think that teaching with a research and development mindset can be rewarding. It can be rewarding for professors, for students, and for institutions. And really that's one of the things I hope to show you over the next little while. And then I just want to give some ideas in terms of teaching quality. You know, means paying attention to at least some degree of interactivity, to having a safe class climate, and to having clear goals. And those are just 3 of the ideas that I'll sprinkle in. That's not everything, but it's just sort of 3 kind of ideas that we've identified as important that I want to share. So that's the take-home messages, and if you want to just take those home at this point, that's good. But if you want to stay, I'd be happy to talk to you for the next little while. Okay? Okay, so let me start with teaching career. I've called it a drama or perhaps a comedy in 3 acts. So I started teaching in the mid-1990s. I trained as a sociologist, and I started working teaching sociology education in a teacher training institution where we train primary school teachers. This is it here. It's called Mary Immaculate College in Limerick. I was not a pedagogy researcher. I was a sociology researcher. My research was on educational policy. It was on the experience of diversity and inequality of teachers and students in classrooms. It wasn't about pedagogy per se. And when I started, you know, everyone I worked with was already a primary school teacher. I wasn't, but they were, and they already knew about teaching. So when I said, you know, does anyone have any advice? Before I do my first lecture, my then head of department said to me, make sure you have some slides prepared, because then the students will know you've prepared for class. They really like it when you look prepared. So that was the advice I got to start teaching. I knew there had to be more to good teaching than just having some slides. And so I tried to think, well, what was good teaching? I was teaching sociology of education. It wasn't something that teachers necessarily saw as being useful to them. It didn't help this kid learn Pythagoras' theorem, And so it was a hard sell. And so one of the things I figured I had to do was I had to make it interesting. I had to communicate some sort of sense of excitement about it. There's an Irish, he was a philosopher and a revolutionary, Pádraig Pearse. In 1912 he wrote a book about the colonial education system. It was called The Murder Machine. In it he talks about the qualities of a teacher. And he says, the teacher should bring to his pupils not a set of ready-made opinions or a stock of cut and dry information, but an inspiration and an example. I liked that. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an inspiration and an example. This was his phrase. He said a teacher should have so infectious an enthusiasm as to kindle new enthusiasm. I wanted to be so excited about sociology that my students would become excited about sociology. That, for me, was what good teaching was. Of course, the other thing about good teaching was that the students needed to be able to take notes. Because they needed to know what was being said in order to be able to study it on the exam, right? And so for me, the difficulty of teaching was this terrible balancing act between being excited and at the same time speaking slow enough that people could write down what I was saying. And for me, when I started out, that's where I was in terms of trying to understand good teaching. In this tension between excitement and being calm and being slow. It wasn't easy. As you've heard, I learned to teach by, in a sense, by modeling myself on other people. I had teachers who had communicated to me an excitement for their discipline. 30 years on, I can still remember one of my social policy teachers called Geoffrey Cook getting so excited about his subject. I can still remember it to this day. So this idea of enthusiasm, I saw good teachers do that. And I also knew that I sometimes came out of lectures with no idea what had happened. And that wasn't good either. So I knew good notes was going to be important. So I lived off my own experience. And to some extent I talked to others and I thought about my teaching. And that's how I developed my teaching. And that was really me for maybe the first 10 years of my career. That was what I aimed at. Things changed for me about 10 years in, about the mid-2000s. I had moved to a different institution at this point. I wasn't just teaching sociology of education anymore, I was teaching philosophy and sociology of education. And part of teaching philosophy was teaching them about a philosopher called Paulo Freire. And Paulo Freire talked about how education makes people stop thinking. It kills creativity. It teaches them to passively accept the words of an authority figure. And I had this awful reality that I was in this room here, started out with 170, and by the time I finished there were over 300 people in it. And I was trying to lecture to them about how lecturing kills creativity and kills individualism and kills student voice. That was hard. It was a real clash happening in my own reality. And so, I started to try and change what I was doing. I still wasn't a pedagogy researcher, but I had this idea, because it wasn't just about giving students a voice. The other thing that struck me at this time was that all of my attention in the classroom was on me. I was up there so busy trying to be excited, so busy trying to hit the right punchline at exactly the right time to get the message through to people. I was only focused on me. There were 300 of them in front of me. They may as well have not been there. You know, as far as I was concerned, I was lacking any sense of relationship with them. So I had this idea. I thought I can put my lectures on video, and I can then spend my time talking to the students in class about the video, and they'll have already watched it. Now this was 2005, okay? So this was before Flipped Classroom. We didn't know it was called Flipped Classroom then. And so I did that, I made these videos, I spent my entire Christmas learning to edit videos in order to make videos for my class. And then the students watched them, and I watched some of them in class with them, and then I ran around like it was a game show with a microphone. I gave them exercises to do, and I asked them questions, and we discussed with each other. And that was a really exciting, interesting experiment to do, but I didn't know if it was working. I didn't know if they were learning more through this than if I just stood and talked to them. And so I wanted to develop this relationship with them. I felt that was working, but I didn't know what its impact was on learning. And so now I had to start gathering more information. And so I started gathering feedback from students in terms of their learning experience. First of all in surveys, and then by having one of the doctoral assistants or one of the postdocs in the department doing focus groups and interviews with them to try and give me some sort of feedback on what was happening. And so my learning to teach kind of moved at this point. It went from being kind of unstructured reflection, just sort of talking to people and thinking, to becoming more structured reflection. I had to read a little bit about what I was doing to design this experiment. I had to, have peers watching me. I had feedback from students, and I was writing it down, and I was sharing it with other people, and I was getting their feedback on it. Yeah? And so I say I wasn't a pedagogy researcher, but I kind of became a pedagogy researcher at this time by trying to understand and improve my own practice. It wasn't really about researching pedagogy. I just wanted to be better at what I was doing. And that involved, in a sense, doing some pedagogical research. So that brought me up to 2011, and then in 2011, I moved to EPFL, the École Polytechnique Fédérale in Lausanne. And at this point, I started to become a pedagogy teacher and researcher, because now I was working with other people in terms of how they could improve their teaching. And again, my idea of what teaching was started to shift again, because as I focused more and more on the evidence around learning, what I realized was that learning isn't really about what I do as a teacher, it's about what the student does. And all I can do is facilitate them in doing stuff that will enable them to learn. And so I started to think less about me and more about them. And how do I enable them to learn? And at this point I was learning to teach by researching teaching and learning, researching other people's teaching, researching my own teaching, researching students' learning, and by helping other teachers to do the same. And by sort of building, if you like, a bit of a community around this idea of researching our teaching. So that's my kind of trajectory, and I'll talk about various different outputs of that in the next few minutes. I just want to sort of tease a few strands through what I've described to you. First of all, what I see in myself is a trajectory from performing teaching to developing relationship with learners to facilitating learning. And actually, when I look at the literature, it turns out I'm not alone in that. That's a very common trajectory for teachers. There's a very old literature around this idea of teacher concern stages. The idea that when teachers start out, what they're thinking about is themselves. They're thinking about how am I acting. And then over time, they start to think about the content. How am I communicating this content? And after some more years, they start to think about the students. And that trajectory outwards from me to the subject to the students is a very common trajectory for teachers, and that's kind of what I experienced myself. From me to us to them. That was the kind of trajectory there. There was also a trajectory in terms of how I learned to improve my teaching. I started out very much modeling. you know. And again, this is a very common idea. You know, when teachers start teaching, they have all seen 10,000 hours of other people teaching, and they have this rich apprenticeship of observation, and it's very hard to let go of that, and it's very hard to not base yourself on that. And so that modeling thing is very common where people start. But I moved through unstructured reflection and eventually moved towards very formally structured reflections as a way of helping me improve what I was doing. And that was also part of the trajectory. And then you know, it went from being a very lonely teacher to a member of a community. I started out going into a room on my own with nothing but the voice of someone who said, make sure you have slides so they know you've prepared. You know, that was a very lonely place to be as an individual in that room by myself. And I've moved from that to someone who's actively working in a community of people who's really, you know, helping each other get better. And that's a much less lonely place to be. So that's a little bit about me, and I just give you that as some sort of background, and hopefully you'll see some of the ideas about quality teaching I'm going to talk about next. You'll see how they have developed through that story. Okay. Okay. So that's the trajectories there. I do want to talk to you about quality teaching and a kind of emerging view of quality teaching. But before we do that, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pick up a phone or an iPad or a laptop or some sort of connected device. I'd like you to log on to a website called responseware.eu. And when you get there, I'd like you to type in the session ID, as you see here, CU of T 2022. And when you do that, it should bring you to a screen which says the presenter is getting ready, please wait. And so for anyone on the live stream, you don't have to be physically here in the room to do that. You can do it from wherever you are. Okay, so it's responseware, .eu, and it's CU of T 2022. All right. So let me open the first question for you. If you're a teacher, answer it as a teacher. If you're a learner, answer it as a learner. Okay, how do you get better at learning? Okay, for teachers, it's about how you get better at teaching. For learners, it's about how do you get better at learning. Okay? Okay, that should now be open. So you should be able to see that question on your device. I will share that to the screen here. Okay, so we're getting there. We're quite close to having all the responses in. Excellent, we're nearly there. Okay, let me close that then in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's look at the results. Okay. So, what have we got? We have quite a lot of people saying, mainly based on teachers they've seen, talking to others, quite common. Written reflections, not so much. Research, teaching and learning, okay, quite a lot there. Just get better over time. That makes perfect sense. And doesn't actually change much, very little. Okay, so that's good to know. I mean, I asked this question just in a sense to help you position yourself in terms of where your story meets my story. Okay, that was the purpose for asking this question. So let's go to the next question here. And that question is now open. So the last question was about you. The next question is to ask you about teaching and learning in general. Right? Are you using your own experience of teaching and learning? See if you can answer this question. There is one answer. Okay, we're nearly there. I'm going to close that in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's look at the results. Okay, so we have a lot of people going for option B, and a lot of people going for option D. Option B was good student-teacher relationship, that's 62%, and then D, we have inquiry-based learning, and very few people going for the others. So we're expecting this to be maybe number 1, and we're expecting this to be number 2, and the others to be low. Okay, that's good to know. Let's take a look at this and see where we go. Let me just drag this off the screen. And go back to here. And now, okay. So this is data from a study by a guy called John Hattie. I said to you that you know, in that period of the late, you know, end of the first decade, a lot changed in the world of educational literature. And a big thing that changed was a big focus on evidence-informed or evidence-based, I prefer the term evidence-informed, practice. And one of the key people in that was a guy called John Hattie. When people do statistical studies of learning, they're able to say, okay, this works better than this, right? But you know that works for that setting. What about for other settings? And so there's not just one study on cooperative learning, there's 200 studies on cooperative learning. And so sometimes it's useful to put them all together. And so there's a statistical technique called meta-analysis where you put together all of the statistical studies on a given topic, okay? What John Hattie did was he didn't do a meta-analysis, he collected meta-analysis. He collected hundreds of meta-analyses, originally 900, up to 1200 meta-analyses of learning, and then he started to look at a meta-analysis, a synthesis of meta-analyses of learning. And it was really interesting because it showed us certain things about learning. The first thing it showed us is that everything works. Actually leaving students alone in a room and telling them what it is you want them to learn works, because they think about it, and they figure it out. And so not teaching works. Everything works. And so that means we as teachers need to set our bar higher. You know, when I walk out of a class and I say, oh, that was good, I really feel like the students learned something today, they would have learned something today whether I was there or not. Okay, it's not enough for me to say they learned something today. I need to say they learned more than they would have learned if I'd used a different technique. You know? So that was sort of, you know, one thing that Hattie identified. And the second thing he identified is that evidence is often different to traditional forms of teaching. So competition. You know, competition is very widely used in schools. You know, the whole education system in terms of getting into university, we were talking about beforehand, is very often based on a competitive model. And as you can see, its impact is lower than other impacts. You know, things which are very fashionable, like, you know, computer-based intelligence tutoring systems, have an impact, but maybe not as high as other things. And then so investment goes here, and then things which are very fashionable, like inquiry-based teaching, where we very often think inquiry-based teaching is going to be good because there's a lot of talk about it. Actually, it's quite mixed. and it kind of depends on what form of inquiry-based teaching, and particularly it depends on how clear you are with the goals of the inquiry-based teaching. And so what Hattie's research tells us, it's not just Hattie, there was a whole bunch of reports which came out around the same time, you know, from the National Research Council in the US, from the New Zealand government, from Hattie himself, from other people. They all started pointing in the same direction, which is that we could use evidence to help inform what we do. So I give you this by way of just a way of thinking about it. Now, I don't want to suggest to you for a second that student-teacher relationship is the top impact. It's not. There are other things which have bigger impact. Feedback to and from teachers to students and students to teachers, that has a higher impact. There's a range of things which have higher impact, but as you can see, of the 4 options I gave you, that one was the one which was fine. All right. So there is evidence out there, and we can use evidence. And so, what does the evidence say? I just want to highlight to you kind of 3 things, because Hattie's kind of work is often, I think, misunderstood. People often take it as a recipe, you know, that let's find the thing which has the biggest impact and let's just do that. Yeah. In fact, what Hattie was really saying is that the things that work have certain characteristics. And rather than just paying attention to this technique works, this technique doesn't work, let's pay attention to the characteristics of what works. Okay? And so his model called visible learning was based on trying to articulate these characteristics of what works. Now I've just pulled out some key things from that I want to talk to you about now. The first is about providing opportunities for students to actively process information. As I said to you already, students don't learn because of what the teacher does, students learn because of what the students do. And what the teacher can do is do stuff that helps the students do the right thing. And so putting the focus on student rather than on teacher. I think that's one of the features of effective teaching. A second is that people learn from having opportunities to make mistakes and get feedback on those mistakes. And that feedback, you know, should ideally be in low stakes environments where it's safe to make mistakes. If it's not safe to make mistakes, then you don't try something you're not able to do. You just reproduce what you're already able to do. Okay? And so safety is crucial to this, as well as, you know, opportunities to try again. And then thirdly, communicating clear goals. You know, it turns out that students are pretty good at learning if we're clear with them about what it is they're expected to learn. You know, and if we treat them as capable people who are able to manage their own learning by being clear with them what we expect them to learn, students can do that. And so clarity with students is really important. So clear goals is important. And not just clear goals, but opportunities for students to clarify what those goals actually mean. I think that's vital. So what I want to do is take these 3 findings and just talk you through them a little bit, but at the same time show you the way in which we're trying to develop this research and development community in EPFL. Okay? So I'm using these as a way of showing you the way in which our kind of community works in EPFL. So let's take the first one. Finding 1, provide opportunities for students to actively process information. Have any of you ever seen this slide before? Am I talking to you about something you know? Okay, all right. So this was a study which was done by Freeman et al. In 2014, and it's a meta-analysis, like I mentioned to you earlier on. Okay, so there's lots of studies out there on active learning as compared to traditional, you know, lecturing. And they went out and they collected as many of these studies as they could. They sorted out which ones were well designed, and there were like 228 of them that were well designed. And then they put those 228, you know, into the statistical technique called meta-analysis, and these are the results they got. So let me just explain to you what this shows. The red line is the learning from traditional teaching, from, if you like, passive lecturing. That's what the dotted red line is in both cases. The dot then you see here is the average effect of using interactive teaching. So you can see the gap between the red line and the dot, okay? And you can see that you know, if the dot was on this side, it would mean that traditional teaching was better. If the dot's on this side, it means that active teaching is better. The bar is the confidence interval around that. Underneath it, the number is the number of studies that they have for each of these different disciplines. Okay, so that's what you see there. Here you see the impact on grades. Here you see the impact on failure rates. To what extent there is a decrease in failure rate. Okay? And what you can see, you know, for yourselves, you don't need me to describe it to you. For all of these disciplines, active learning turns out to have, on average, more positive outcomes in terms of reduced failure rates and in terms of attainment than traditional lecturing does. Okay, and so that was Freeman's study, 2014, where he looked at this across a wide range of science and engineering disciplines. Can I go back? Ask you to go back to the responseware, and can you tell me, are you convinced? So the question there on responseware is now open. To what extent do you agree with the statement? Having seen the Freeman et al. Data, I'm convinced that active learning would probably improve student learning in my courses on average. And that's written so you can answer it whether you're a student or a teacher. So we have responses from about half the people who are on there right now. So I'll give it just another couple of seconds to see if other people want to provide responses. Okay, we're up to about 2/3 of participants have responded at this point. You'll see I didn't give you a I don't know option here. I'm forcing you into a choice. I'm doing that deliberately. Okay? So if you don't know, you know, pick one. Go with what your gut says. Okay? Just follow your gut. Okay, so I'm going to close that then in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Close. And the results should now be on your screen. So you either strongly agree or agree. Everyone strongly agrees or agrees. You can see that on your own screen. We have 50% strongly agree, 50% agree. Okay, so you expect it's going to work. What happened when we tried it in our place? That's what I want to talk to you about. Okay, because we had this conversation. You know, is it going to work? Our teachers, we talked to some of our teachers about it. We said, look, the evidence is really clear. And they said, yeah. You know, North Americans, they like to talk a lot. Maybe it'll be different in Switzerland, where everyone's just a little bit, you know, quieter. Maybe cultural factors. Maybe it won't work for the way we teach what we teach. You know, maybe it's not going to work here. So we said, okay, well, let's try. And so our math department volunteered to try. And we ran a very large experiment with them over a number of years, which is published in this paper here. These are the other authors on it, Cecile, Imanshu, and Simone. We asked students coming into first year to volunteer, to participate in a flipped class experiment for linear algebra. The first year we had 500 people sign up for it. The second year we asked 300 people sign up for it. So that told us something straight away. It told us that a very large proportion of our intake wanted some sort of teaching which was a bit different than what we normally offer, right? Before we knew anything else, we knew that there was a demand for this. So they were split into experimental groups, which would get a flipped class, and a control group. So if they were randomly selected to be in the experimental group, they went to one teacher. If they were selected to be in the control group, they went back to the teacher they would have got. Otherwise, there were 8 other teachers. Okay, so that meant it wasn't just a comparison between two teachers, it was very much a comparison between the flipped class and all of the rest. Yeah? In that then we analysed student exam performance based upon experimental condition, on gender, on prior mathematical knowledge, a whole range of different things. Now, there were major logistical and analytical and ethical headaches with putting this in place. I don't want to make it as easy. I'm not going to bore you with all of the headaches we had, but there was a huge amount of work went into this. I don't want to downplay it and say it was very easy. It wasn't. Okay. So a lot of work went into it, and what did we find? Did using a flipped class setting have an impact on their attainment? No, it did not. On average, the attainment was the same in the flipped and in the non-flipped group. Okay, I've just given you the data here for year 2, but it was the same, pretty much the same in year 1. No difference in flipped and control. Okay, well, one of the things we did see in the pre-existing data was that very few of the pre-existing studies had also looked at differentiating the class, because our classes are not homogeneous. They're not everyone the same. They have come from a range of different schools with a range of different backgrounds. We have some students who've, very high prior attainment in math and physics. Some students who very little prior math and physics. So we wanted to look at the differentiation within the class. Part of what we wanted to look at was the gender gap. We had a persistent finding that women tended to perform less well in our normal math classes than the men in first year. And what we saw with this experiment was that gap between women in blue and men in red reduced in the flipped setting. So that was interesting. The overall attainment didn't change, but the inequalities within the class changed. And that was even more evident than we looked at prior knowledge, at prior attainment coming in. The red students in red here are the ones who haven't a lot of math and physics before coming in. The other students are students either coming from France or from Switzerland who do have a lot of math and physics coming in. And what you see is that the students who don't have a lot of math and physics before coming in actually move right up much closer to the middle of the pack, if you like, in the flipped setting as compared to the control setting. So on average it didn't improve attainment, but it certainly seems to address some of the inequality issues which looked like they were baked into the teaching that was there. So that was interesting, right? I mentioned this study because it's a kind of been an important study for us and for our community more generally. The findings look kind of limited, right? The confidence intervals look kind of wide on the previous thing I showed you, and that's normal enough because we work with the intake we have. And our intake is very heavily gender imbalanced, as it very often is in a technical school. And so it's actually quite hard to get data which is going to be solid on gender inequalities in technical school education, as evidenced by the fact that when Freeman attempted to do a meta-analysis looking at diversity issues, there wasn't enough studies for him to be able to include gender in the analysis, right? So the fact that we were able to get some data on gender at all was in itself pretty cool, even if it wasn't quite as clear-cut as we would have liked. Within our school, though, I think this study kind of had a big impact. The teacher involved, Simone, who you saw on the first slide, he won the Teacher of the Year award in our school. A lot of people wanted to talk to him about what he was doing because it wasn't someone in Seattle talking about what they do in Seattle. It was a trusted colleague in their own institution who they knew, and they knew that he wasn't, crazy. And it was worth talking to him and hearing about his experience. And that then had a big impact. When COVID hit, we all ended up with videos of our teaching. And so then what were we going to do with all of these videos? We'd spend, days trying our best to produce good videos, were we just going to use them once and drop them? No, lots of teachers said, well, this might be a good opportunity for me to do something which was more flipped. This data here was collected by our teachers representative body on what sort of teaching strategies people are using in their classes in our school now. And as you can see, discussion or project-based teaching is here. Strongly interactive teaching is the dark green. The lighter green, mainly frontal teaching, but with some discussion, a bit like what I'm doing here. That's the lighter green. And then the other green is totally frontal teaching. I lecture, I don't ask them questions. We don't have any interaction. Okay. And as you can see, that's a small minority now. Even in big classes, right? It's only 20%. Even in large classes, 80% of even large classes are using some degree of interactive teaching. Now, is that all because we did this study? No, it's not. But this study, along with the experience of COVID and the resources that we had, actually sort of helped to put in place a picture whereby it made sense to teachers to look at adapting their teaching. And so even if the findings of the study are maybe not as clear-cut as we would have liked based upon Freeman's original meta-analysis, this study itself kind of had quite a big impact, and I think has contributed significantly to improving teaching across the school. Okay, that's finding one. Let me talk to you about finding two. Finding two is about relationship and about a safe environment. And it comes from this paper here on student-teacher relationships in higher education. Let me send you back to the responseware. And my question now is this. You have been able to answer multiple choice questions in the course of this lecture. Have you been able to answer them without feeling a fear of being embarrassed in public? Okay, we're about halfway there now. You can see the question on your device, yeah? So I don't need to show it on the screen. Okay, cool. We're about 2/3 of the way there now. Okay. I'm going to close that in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you have the results on your device. And the answer is 62% strongly agree and 38% agree. Okay, so this tool kind of was a way of enabling people to engage a bit with a feeling of safety. Yeah, and I don't know about you, when I'm in a room and the teacher says, tell me what you think, my first thought is, I don't know what I think yet. And I'm not yet ready to share my thoughts, with 25 or 35 or 50 or 150 other people. So something that enables me to share my thoughts or take a position a little bit in a way that's safe, anonymous, that can help, right? So why model classroom emotional relationships? You saw earlier on that I got interested in relationship in terms of not just being about me and my performance, but also in terms of some sort of exchange of what was happening in the class. When I was working with student teachers, it became apparent to me that that teaching was an enormously emotional experience. Yeah. The learners were experiencing emotions: frustration, boredom, anger, joy. All of these things the learners were experiencing. And the teachers were trying to help manage those emotions. But the teachers also had their own emotions going on. And our teachers were student teachers, so they were learning to teach. So they didn't just have the experience of teaching the stuff, they also had the same learner experience. Frustration, joy, and then they also had me coming in and sitting in the back of their class and giving them a grade, which sometimes to them felt really unfair. So they had anger and, those emotions too. And I realized that this learning to teach was just this incredibly emotionally filled environment. And yet, when people looked at teacher education at the time, they didn't look at the emotional experience of it. They talked about the practices, they talked about the thinking, they talked about the modes of representation. It was all about cognition and doing, and not really a whole lot about feeling. So that started to interest me. And when I moved to universities, that sort of never went away, right? This interest in what's happening in terms of classrooms was still there. The data I showed you earlier on about teacher-student relationship being important, within that meta-analysis, it does look as if it's actually more important for older kids than it is for younger kids, right? So it's not just something that happens in primary school, it continues to be important right throughout their career, including when they get to university. And the difficulty is that there was no good way of creating a model of what it looked like. What were the dimensions that were important to them? So, we know that when the relationship is good, students turn out more, there's less absenteeism. We know that, that they engage more, they feel safer, and they try more, they persist more, and all of these things are likely to lead into learning. And so these emotions seem to be important, but what's important in emotion? Originally I thought it was liking, I thought it was warmth. I thought I need to tell them I like them, and I need them to like me. And if I like them and they like me, then we'll get good learning going on here. But actually, is liking really what's important, or are there other dimensions to it? And so as I looked into it, I realized there were other dimensions. There was a sort of teacher credibility. Awe is a big word. Maybe awe is too strong, but impressed at least. Yeah, being impressed by the teacher, that's an emotion you feel. And does it matter? It matters to the teacher. Does it matter to the learning? What about safety, trust? Do I trust the teacher? That might seem like a strange thing, but when you look at studies of classroom misbehavior, one of the things students identify as misbehavior is untrustworthy teachers. Teachers who pull a test on them when they're not expected. Teachers whose grading for the test is not according to what the student expected based upon the course. These trust issues turn out to be, something that students identify as being important to their experience. And so that led me into this idea of a kind of three-dimensional model of relationships. Warmth, liking each other is part of it. And particularly for students, if they're going to work with each other, if they're going to do a lot of interactivity, some degree of interpersonal warmth is going to be important there. It's the basis of social cooperation. But security, do the students feel that they can trust the teacher or not? If they feel they can trust the teacher, does that change the way in which they engage in learning? And then the third is about power and status. We talk about power, but I mean it in terms of soft power. I mean it in terms of teacher credibility or status. I don't mean it in terms of, write me 2,000 words by tomorrow morning. I don't mean that. I mean that the teacher is credible, the teacher has status, the teacher is respected. But I also mean the students being empowered. If the teacher does all the work and the students, go out feeling useless, then that's no good, right? There's a wonderful paper about teaching math called Why Good Teachers Get Bad Results. And the idea is that sometimes when you're doing a math demonstration as a teacher, you're just so good at it that as the students sit there and look at you, they go, I can't do that. And what they learn is it's all magic. That's just impossible. And they give up and they go home. So do the students leave the room feeling empowered? Yeah, is power shared in the relationship? So those were the three kind of dimensions. We try to look at this, devised a way of testing it. I won't bore you with the psychometric details of the instrument we developed. But one of the things we did was we asked students in terms of their emotional experience of classrooms, and then we looked at it in terms of their feedback to the teachers, their evaluation of the teaching. A little bit careful about this. Students' evaluation of teaching is not necessarily a good indicator of learning, but it was, it's something that's important at least to teachers, because, it's important to me that students have a positive experience in my class. So it might not be the best data, it's at least some way important data. So what have we found? We found that perceptions of teacher status, some sense of awe or being impressed, respecting what the teacher's at, that was actually contributing most to the variance in students' evaluations of teaching. That explained most of the variance. But safety explained the next biggest amount. Feeling that they could trust the teacher was really important. Actually, warmth was way down. It wasn't that it wasn't important, it's just it was way down. And so I focus on safety here, because safety is maybe the most manageable dimension which is important. There are relatively straightforward behavioral things I can do to try and help students feel safe. I cannot embarrass them if they ask a question. I can tell them their question is a good question. I can tell them that, I think, it's a good question, and I think other people were thinking that question themselves. I can make them feel safe. I can be clear about what I expect of them. I can be clear about when things are going to be assessed and how they're going to be assessed, and what the grading rubric looks like, and what it looks like in practice. I can create a sense that my class is predictable, and they're not going to get a surprise. And that's something I can manage. And if I can manage it, and if it's important, well, maybe I should manage it. So that's the second finding. The third one is about communicating clear goals. Okay. So again, this is John Hattie. This is from his paper in 2016. When students have an understanding of the success criteria for lessons and are somewhat clear at the outset about what it means to master the lessons, then their subsequent learning is maximized. Understanding the goal of the lesson really matters to actually learning in it. And so this was something we were interested in. In engineering, the students do a lot of projects. And in science courses, students do a lot of projects. And oftentimes we have this idea that they will learn to manage projects by doing projects. But do they? Is just giving them projects enough for them to actually learn how to manage projects? And so that's what this study was at. The other people involved were Cyril Picard, Cecile, who you saw earlier, and Jörg Schiffman. Jörg was the professor involved, Cyril was his PhD student, and Cecile and I from the CAP team involved in supporting this study. Okay, so what did they do? Jörg had two different project courses that he taught in engineering. One was a very traditional project course where students got a project, they did the project. And in the other one, they not only got the project, they also got inputs. Quite short inputs, but inputs about things like project management and risk analysis and so on. They weren't very big inputs, but just little ones. And this was being measured with an instrument which measures self-efficacy beliefs about project management, called the IPMQ. Again, I won't bore you with the psychometric details of the instrument. We developed it. But here's what you see in the first course that I mentioned. It's only a project, there's no explicit teaching of skills, and as you can see, there's little change in project management self-efficacy beliefs from the beginning of the course to the end. Giving students a project is not enough for them to learn how to manage projects. That's what we see there. But when there is a short explicit teaching of project management skills, and when there is regular formative feedback to students on those skills, you start to see notable changes in their self-efficacy beliefs about project planning, risk assessment. We see some changes in ethical sensitivity, but it's not statistically significant. Interprofessional competence, and we see an overall, quite a notable change in their overall self-efficacy beliefs about project management. So, I say project management, but actually a lot of the times the things we want students to learn are not things that we are explicit with them about. the things that are quite implicit. You know, the reason we give them so many problems to do in first year physics and math isn't just because we want them to learn how to solve that problem, we want them to learn how to solve problems. You know, the reason we give them projects isn't just that we want them to design a widget, we want them to learn how to manage projects. So this notion of implicit goals runs right throughout our university education. It helps if we make it explicit, right? I think that's what you see here. Now, again, that's just what we found, but what we found matches with what Hackey finds from his big net analysis, okay? So I'm not asking you to believe it based upon one study, but the fact that we do that study in our place means that when we talk to teachers about it, we're not just talking about something that is an abstract thing that happened out there in the world. They can go and talk to Jurg about his experience and what he found by doing this in his class. Okay, so those are some features that I wanted to point out to you. You know, provide opportunities for students to actively process information, provide a safe environment and those takes opportunities to try and try again, and communicate clear goals. And in telling you that story, I wanted to tell you the story about how we try to produce a research and development community which puts educational, pedagogical advisors alongside interacting with teachers to try to apply what educational scientists have found in our setting in ways which could produce compelling stories which might actually have an impact on what other teachers do. That's kind of the background to what I was trying to tell you here. And so I want to finish off with just some reflections on a culture of teaching improvement. This is some of our teachers from our last faculty retreat, talking to each other about project-based learning. So these are, this is the learning process for teachers going on here. So I'm sure you've seen a slide like this before, right? This is Bologna 1350. This is Lausanne 2014. And it looks very similar, right? You know, you've got the person up here and they've got a book they're reading from, and you've got a person up here and they've got stuff they're reading from. You've got all these people sitting in rows and they all have something that in front of them they're writing on or reading from, just like all of these people sitting in rows who all have something they're writing on or reading from. This guy's asleep. These guys up here are talking to each other. And I'm sure if we look carefully at this picture here, we'd find people talking to each other and we'd find people asleep. Has teaching really changed so little in 650 years? And if so, why? Why has it changed so little in all that time? Why is it that most teaching innovations don't stick? Okay, there are 4 reasons why teaching innovations don't stick. Let me tell you what they are. Number 1, teaching innovations answer a need that the teacher doesn't think they have. Very often someone says, I think it will be a good idea if all of the courses had learning outcomes. Or if, all of the courses got turned into a project course. Or if we introduced discovery learning in our courses. Someone comes up with an answer and it's not answering a question that the teacher has. And so, your innovation sounds wonderful, I think it's great, but it doesn't solve my problem. Okay, and if it doesn't solve my problem, I'm not going to invest time and effort in it. And ultimately, I'm the one in the room. The teacher is the one in the room. The teacher is the one who's going to teach. And we have hundreds of classes going on across the university on any given day. No one's going to watch all of them. If the teacher doesn't own the change isn't going to happen. Okay, so first of all, innovations that answer a need the teacher doesn't think they have, that's not going to work. Secondly, where there's no model for what the innovation might look like in a class like theirs or with students like theirs, it's not going to be adopted. So we did this thing with clickers. When we started to introduce these kind of questions with our teachers, they said, yeah, you're a sociologist. There's a lot of discussion in sociology. I can see why that would work in sociology. Is it really going to work in physics? Physics is right or wrong. It's not really a discussion. until they saw models of what it looked like in physics, until they saw a professor from Harvard and his model of peer instruction, Eric Mazur, teaching it in physics and showing them what it looked like, it's very hard to adopt it in physics. The interesting thing was, a few years ago I was in Sciences Po in Paris talking to people, and they said, yeah, no, I can see why that would work in physics, because multiple choice questions, right? The answers are either right or wrong. We do a lot more discussion. You couldn't really have multiple choice questions in sociology. Sociologists said it couldn't work in sociology, it could work in physics. Physicists said it couldn't work in physics, it would work in sociology. Everyone thinks it would work somewhere else, unless they see it working in a class like theirs with students like theirs. That's why the experiments we've been doing in our place are so important. Because they show it local. They show it working here, not out there. Third, the short-term costs of the change outweighs the uncertain long-term benefits. I tell you that if you write learning outcomes, then your courses are just going to be so much clearer to the students, and they're going to learn so much that the long-term benefits might never happen, and it's going to take some work in the short term. And you've all got just so much work to do already. So why invest in the short-term cost when the long-term benefits still through? And the fourth reason is that the innovation doesn't actually work. It's a fashion or a fad. Yeah, and it actually has very little impact on learning. It's not going to make learning better, and so therefore, ultimately, everyone's going to get fed up with it, and they're not going to do it anymore. Those are 4 reasons why teaching innovations don't work, and all of those can be addressed, right? How do we make it teaching innovations that will stick and will work? First of all, pedagogical teams, universities need to trust teachers, they need to listen to teachers, and they need to partner with teachers. Partner with teachers, we need to respect their interests, we need to respect their views. Even if we think they're wrong, their reality still counts. Because theirs is the important reality in the room, because they're the one who's going to manage what happens in the room. The teacher's reality counts. And so we pay attention to teachers. And we listen to teachers, and we work with teachers to develop innovations that answer questions that they have, using techniques that they think are feasible within their domain. Okay, so that's the first thing we can do. The second thing we can do is test ideas in our local environment to see how they work there, and then spread the news. You've seen that in the example we gave you about the classrooms. You've seen that in the other studies. We use the local studies we do, and then we share that with other teachers. So as they see that it's not just someone in Seattle, it works here with your teachers and your students and your materials. We address the cost issue. We try and make sure that pedagogical support and pedagogical research support is available to teachers. We reduce for them the cost of trying something new. Teachers are teaching because they're experts in their domain. We can't expect them to be pedagogical experts and pedagogical research experts on top of that. We've got to bring that to the party to make it work. And prioritize evidence-informed teaching practices. Then if the evidence is out there, is strong, then there's a good chance it's going to work here. And so, work with the evidence. Okay, so before I finish, what I would like you to do is go back to Responseware. And in Responseware, you should now have an invitation to write one word that stands out for you after this presentation. So, you've only got one word, pick it carefully. Okay, we're halfway there. Okay, given that people are typing, I'm going to give you more than just 5 seconds before I close this. I'm going to give you 10 seconds. So I'm going to close it in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay. So, let me share this with you so you can see what was said. Okay, so those are the range of different responses people got out of this. Obviously, I restricted you to one word, but I'm happy with that list. Not really simple word, anyway. Good plus. Okay. Obviously, the purpose of doing this isn't just for me to get one word. It's to get you to think about what you just experienced, right? This is active processing of information. That's why that's the other reason we use this tool. Because it gets you actively involved in processing the information. Okay, so let me finish. Here was the take-home message I presented to you at the beginning. I come back to it at the end. Again, clear goals. Try to clarify the goals at the beginning, and I come back to them at the end, and I hope that they still make sense. I hope it makes sense to you now that you have a clear idea in terms of what I mean by this idea of a research and development mindset, and why it can be rewarding for teachers, for students, and indeed for the institution as a whole. And hopefully, some ideas around interactivity, a safe class climate, and clear goals also make sense to you. I'm going to stop there and say thank you very much. And I'm happy to discuss with you all. I'm keeping you guys from lemonade. So, if you want to go and get lemonade rather than discuss, that's okay with me too. But if you have any questions or discussion points, I'm happy to talk to you. Yeah?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah?
As we have seen the educational system, especially I can say for Cyprus, it's now a school. I am first year at university, so I only know about high schools. What can we do to start making the change? The educational system has been the same about 100 years now and more, I think.
Yeah, so I put up that slide which showed no difference between 1350 and today. I think there have been a lot of changes,
We can't make the change for one day to another, but
yeah.
in a long time scale, what can we do?
So if we take school systems,
Yes.
in Europe at least, the school systems which have been very successful. So Finland is often held up as a model of the place which has been successful. In Finland, what was key to their success was about trusting in teachers, investing in teachers, treating teachers as being professionals, and then giving them the support to make good decisions. And so it's not that they were unaccountable, they were very accountable, but they were accountable to their local community of teachers that they had to be able to explain their rationale to. There was much less external accountability of an inspector coming in and saying, you must teach like this or you must teach like that. It wasn't where the curriculum was very tightly specified. Nobody tried to teacher-proof the curriculum by saying, you have to teach this and then this and then this in exactly this way. So the methods which were used were not deprofessionalizing. They weren't treating teachers as, idiots. They were treating teachers as being professionals who were capable of making tough decisions in complex situations. And then they tried to support the teachers in doing that by helping them with doing research on their own practice, by giving them communities to work in. Yeah. And so for me that remains the model, whether it's at high school or whether it's at university. It's about investing in professionalism of teachers and trusting them and giving them a community within which they can they can grow and develop that skills. So yeah, for me, we were talking earlier on about the difference in quality improvement and quality control. It's about a quality improvement system rather than a quality control system. For me, I think that's what's key. Does that make sense?
I don't want to say that both of my parents are teachers at the schools, and I can say that I know that it's a hard job for a teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very hard.
Yeah.
And I see many students who hate school or hate learning.
Right.
I had some great teachers, big minds, and so good at the field. But they made the subject so boring that the students just couldn't follow. Okay, in the classroom. So what can teachers do for make?
So it really strikes me in what you said. You use a number of words there which describe student emotions. You talked about hate, you talked about boredom.
Yeah.
And again, I think paying attention to the emotional experience in the classroom, for any teacher is really important. How are students experiencing it? Hate, boredom, not great emotions for learning. It's not that the classroom always has to be filled with joy, right? I mean, when I'm trying to solve a math problem, I'm very often frustrated, okay? Frustration is a normal part of not understanding.
Yes.
And because not understanding is the beginning of starting to understand something new, frustration is good.
Yes.
So some negative emotions are productive, and then some negative emotions are not productive. If someone says to me, "You didn't solve that problem, you're so stupid," that's really hurtful. And now I can't even think straight because I'm hurt and my whole mental processing has closed down. So creating a safe place in which I can live with my frustration and work through it, and in which I understand my frustration is valuable, and where I'm sort of intrigued about the possibility of learning here. These are all the sort of management of emotions that good teaching will involve. And so for me, I think in what you describe, I'm hearing a lot of emotion. I'm hearing that this idea of thinking about emotion in the classroom is potentially productive. Does that sound?
Yes.
At the beginning, you mentioned this trajectory between looking at ourselves, then to the content, and then to our students, which I agree fully with that trajectory. But I thought, when we say we focus on the content, I assume you mean how to handle it,
Yeah.
and how to process it and transfer it. But then I wonder if one other parameter is also the context, the setup in a classroom, let's say, or the use of technology, and whether in that trajectory we also overdose our students with a lot of that.
Right.
So we have an interactive space, and then interactive blackboards, and then we have lots of Zooming and all these other tools. And whether there is, have you investigated the limit of how much of that we can use in a class?
So I won't say we've investigated in any systematic way. Certainly we saw in the early stages of the pandemic that we were all trying lots of different things to engage students. And what that rapidly led to was a multiplication of different tools and techniques which have been used. And the very quick feedback we got from students was that at this point it's overwhelming. I don't know whether I'm supposed to be on Slack or Moodle or Ed Discussion or Piazza or what. And so what we try to do then, particularly our Centre for Digital Education in EPFL, try to identify a tool which met the needs for each of the key domains, and we then try to mainstream that as much as possible. We didn't force it on teachers. If they wanted to do something different, we let them do it, but we said this is the one we're going to support, and we'd encourage you to try and minimize the range of different things going on. I mean, I think in terms of learning, that there's this sort of idea of cognitive load. There's only so many new things you can deal with at any moment, and if you're trying to figure out how the technology works, you probably can't pay attention to the teacher. And actually, it's the same for teachers, right? I'm teaching my class this year in this new hybrid room we're modelling, and they put five screens in it as well as my laptop. I didn't know where to look last week. You know, there were just so many screens. I was lost in the room. And I'm used to two screens. I'm used to having this screen and this screen, and I know how to toggle from one to the other, as you saw. But give me five screens, and you know, and at that point I'm so busy counting screens that actually I can't remember what it is I was trying to say. So the cognitive overload is there for teachers as well as students. I will get over that. I'll figure out which screens have what on it, and over a few weeks I'm going to get better at it. And then the cognitive load will be less, and then I'll be able to use it a bit better. So I don't want to say that there's a limited number of things that you can handle, but there is a limited number of new things that you can handle all at the same time. And I think part of it then is about trajectory. So I mean, if I go back to the flipped classroom example, when Simone did the flipped classroom, he did, the first year he did a single class. He didn't try and flip the whole thing, he did a single class. And the next year he did a third or a quarter of the class, and the next year he did like 2/3 of it. And he, you know, he says that the feedback he got from students after the first flipped class he did with them, when he asked them for their feedback on their experience of it, was a huge learning experience. And that really allowed them to scale it up, and that allowed them to scale it up again. But trying to do it all at once would have been overwhelming for him. And he's a really experienced teacher. He knows the subject inside out. He's been teaching it for years. So the actual content of the linear algebra isn't a cognitive load for him, and that allowed him the sort of headspace to learn to do it. But it was a 3-year process. And oftentimes, again, so maybe that's the other thing I didn't put up there about why innovations don't succeed, is that we don't give them long enough. You know, the actual amount of time that it will take to embed an innovation is probably a lot longer than we think it's going to be at the beginning. So, yeah, does that answer the question a bit? We get project funding, and the project funding lasts 3 years, and at the end of that, the project needs to be finished.
Yeah.
You know, but it's not finished. People are only just barely getting used to this thing.
And then there's another project coming.
Exactly. Yeah.